Hello, everyone. Uh, right, happy to have you here. I hope everybody's doing well and that this end of the lockdown is positively seen by most of you. Right. Um, as I've already told you, it might be my only class for this week, right? Due to OIB recruitment and so on. So I will try and be hello everybody. I will try to be as efficient as possible today and maybe try to not to drift too far away from um, my structure for today. Um, we are still studying Margaret Thatcher's first mandate. And today I'm going to tell you the basics about a major moment in Margaret Thatcher premiership during her first mandate, which is the Falkland War. Generally, when students take the OIB final exams, under the normal circumstances, this is a question which is often used for two reasons. Firstly, it's used as a way to assess the type of achievements that Margaret Thatcher had as a prime minister. And that's the first point. But also, it's one of the possible case studies to study the relationship between the media, the governments, and the public opinion. And so, the lesson today I'm going to tell you about is not exactly about the war itself. There was a war in 1982 called the Falkland War, and I will spend like 10 minutes maximum explaining you why there was this war and why there was a war between Argentina and the United Kingdom. But actually the war lasted for a few weeks only. Overall, it made overall a limited amount of casualties. So the war in itself as an event is not that important. With all due respect for the people who died during the war, but it's not a major conflict, okay? It didn't last for years and it didn't kill millions of people and so on. The impact it had is that clearly it totally transformed Margaret Thatcher's mandate, how she was perceived in the United Kingdom, how she was perceived in the public opinion in the UK, how she was perceived in her own camp, in the Conservative Party, and clearly it can be seen as a game changer in Margaret Thatcher premiership. Hello to everybody. Hello to those I've not said hello to yet. Happy to see you here. So, just a reminder. Sorry, you've got a document. Today I'm going to analyze three things actually. Firstly, after an introduction on what are the Falkland Islands and why were they in the center of a conflict between Argentina and the UK, I'm going to insist on three things. Firstly, this war has been nicknamed the worst reported war since the Crimean War. And the Crimean War was a war in 1856. So you see, it's a war from the 19th century. And for many reasons, for many technical and political reasons, it's a war that happened in 1982, but there were fewer pictures of this war than there was for the Vietnam War, for example. So for a war that happened in 1982, there was very little to show about it, and we'll see why. Secondly, it clearly was a media war. It means that in the United Kingdom, and I think that's the interest actually of this lesson, in the United Kingdom, the war was also a war between medias, and especially between the newspapers and Aunt Bib. Aunt Bib is the nickname for the BBC, right? It's a a nickname, an effective nickname that the British give to the BBC, Aunt Beeb, because she's old and venerable and she's part of the family. That's why she's nicknamed Aunt Beeb. And I will try and tell you a bit more about a specific British press, which is called the tabloids. We don't have some of them in France, actually, so I'm going to tell you exactly what type of press this is. And you may know the Sun as one example. And sometimes the Falkland War was nicknamed the Sun War, because they played a major part in it to influence the British opinion. Finally, we see how Margaret Thatcher used the Falkland War to build an image of herself which was very Churchillian, okay? And so that she took advantage of the war, which she won eventually, to, how can I say this? Certainly improve her image, but also display an image of herself which was, like a war leader. And a war leader that you could trust. And if you could trust her for a war against the Argentinians, you could trust her in a war to reform the UK against all the blocs, against all the Keynesian failures, about all the obstacles that prevented the UK from being a modern economy and modernizing country. And what I want you to understand is that thanks to a victory in the Falkland War, she was able to go further in her reforms. And the next step was fighting the strikes and fighting the miners' strike and fighting the trade unions' opposition in the UK. Okay? And this is something we'll see next time. Right? So, it's a quite important moment in the history of the United Kingdom. And the first thing is that I will show you what so it's more an introduction about this. There is a summary on Moodle, okay? All the documents about the Falkland War are already available on Moodle as a slide and as a slideshow and as various documents. You will find some documents in French in this lesson, and the reason is that generally with Monsieur Heropoulos we tend to teach this class together. Like, he presents the general context in French because it's associated to a Spanish-speaking country, which is more his specialty, Argentina, and I teach in English the part about the media. So don't be surprised if you find some documents in French. It's not that I was lazy to translate them, but it's because they're normally part of the lesson we teach together. Okay? So maybe just a reminder of Margaret Thatcher's situation before the war in the Falkland started. If you remember, she was elected Prime Minister and she won the general election in the UK in 1979, and she immediately decided to implement her anti-Keynesian policies or monetarian policies. So she passed austerity budgets with freezing the wages, with less spending by the state in the welfare state, and so on. The results were that the unemployment in the UK increased dramatically, almost double, from 5.5 to 10.5% in 3 years. So the first years of her mandate, economically and socially speaking, were disastrous. Moreover, if you remember, there were a lot of political and social tensions. The race riots in Brixton with a lot of, looting and street fights and riots. And that ended with people being killed during these moments. Okay, and also something I have not mentioned, which is the fact that there was terrorism in Northern Ireland, right? It was a moment when the Republican Army, the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, was fighting against the reunification of Northern and Southern Ireland, and they were committing some terror attacks and that including targeting Margaret Thatcher, right? They wanted to kill her because she was a Prime Minister of the UK. So, clearly, the beginning of her mandate was a disaster, leading to her having the lowest popularity for a Prime Minister since World War II. According to the different polls and surveys, the support she had in the population was only 24%, only 3 years after she had been elected. She had one of the worst beginning as a Prime Minister in the UK ever. Okay? Between March and June 1982, there were the tensions and then the war about the Falkland that led to a British victory. And the results were that during the crisis, as she managed to display as a war leader, she got a wide popular approval of her policies, and she decided to organize a general election in 1983, which she won overwhelmingly. She won in a landslide. It was a massive victory for her and her party, and that gave her a new confidence. Firstly, to pursue liberal reforms, and also to be able to attack her opposition firmly. The miners, the trade unions, the Irish Republican Army in Northern Ireland, the Europeans in the EEC, because she wanted to gain from her negotiations with the other European countries. And so if you remember, when she started, she was nicknamed the Iron Lady, the Iron Lady, the one that the lady's not for turning, she's very determined and so on. And clearly, the Falkland War gave her more of this feeling that she had a plan, she had an agenda, she had a vision, and she wanted to implement it. Okay? Right. Okay. These are, sorry, my bad, you don't need this one. Okay. Where are, as usual, if you have any question, right, do not hesitate to ask them during the presentation. Okay, let's do a, don't worry when I say some geography, it's the as little geography as needed. So, this is a map. This is a map of the distance between the United Kingdom and the Falkland Islands. If you look at the map, you can see that the Falkland Islands are located in the South Atlantic Ocean, right? Just facing Argentina. Why were the Falkland, so-called Malvinas in Spanish, that's the name Argentina gave them, so Islas Malvinas for Argentina and the Falklands for the British, or the Falkland Islands. Why do you have such islands belonging to the United Kingdom? This dates back to the time of colonization, when the British strategy of controlling the seas was to have regular bases, okay, territories scattered all around the world, so they could have places to have supply zones. The British Navy would use islands to make regular stops so they could get supplies and also have strategic position in specific places like the South Atlantic Ocean. When you own the Falkland, and if you look at this more precisely, and then I will zoom on another document, the Falkland Islands are a way to control the Magellan Strait. The Magellan Strait is between Chile and Argentina's continent and the islands at the bottom of Chile, at the south of Chile and Argentina. So when you control the Magellan Strait and the Cape Horn, you can control the maritime circulation here. So the British had kept these islands, right, so as to control the maritime trade and maritime circulation, traffic, between the South Atlantic Ocean and the South Pacific Ocean. What do the Falkland look like? So, the Falkland, so just some more documents. Okay, so that's coming from Google Earth. So, this is the south of on the left, you can see the south of Argentina. Okay. You can see some white on the map because these are the Andine Mountains, okay, very high mountains from Chile and Argentina. And as you can see, facing them, you've got an archipelago. This archipelago is the Falkland. What does it look like? What does it look like? It actually looks like, they actually look like a beautiful place with not much on it. This is the landscape of the Falkland Islands. It's globally greeny. It can be with harsh winters, but it's a place of pastures. Globally, there are only 3 activities you can do on the Falkland. Fishing, and it's an island which is inhabited by mostly fishermen and women. Sheep breeding, okay, and some exploitation of resources like a bit of oil and a bit of metallic resources, metallic minerals. But clearly, there is not much on the Falkland Island. It's not that strategic. The major city is Port Stanley. That's the major city. It has something like 2,000 inhabitants, so it's hardly a city, it's more like a large village, right? And today, the Falkland Islands are inhabited by less than 3,000 people. So, can you just keep this in mind? That's actually what they've done. They have put ship on it. So, clearly, what does that mean? 3,000 inhabitants. Fishing, sheep breeding, some exploitation of the exclusive economic zone, the EEZ, and that's it. Okay, we're not talking about a major strategic resource in this place, right? So why was there a war about these islands? Because the Falkland have a British governor. So it's part of the British remains of their former empire, of their former Commonwealth of Nations. Okay? And it's an autonomous territory, right? For the British, the interest is clearly the strategic position at the south of the Atlantic Ocean. But for decades, there had been tensions between the UK and Argentina because the Argentinian government was claiming that the Falklands, the Malvinas, were theirs. And they had put the question in the hands of the United Nations. So the United Nations had been willing for years to solve it peacefully. You know, the role of the United Nations is to try to find diplomatic solutions when there are risk of confrontation. So the United Nations, with both the Argentinians and the British, were trying to set up negotiations and a framework of arrangements for the future of the Falkland. To say it differently, there was a disagreement on the status of the Falkland, but actually there was no reason for a war. One reason why the war started was due to the situation in Argentina at that time. And so this map is in French. I'm sorry for this. I've got plenty of documents in English about the Falkland, but this one has the advantage of telling you everything. In March 1982, okay, so let's go to the war itself. In March 1982, the Argentinian government was sending more and more signs that they were willing to solve the Falkland problems. They had renewed their demands to the United Nations that the Falkland the Malvinas, should come back to Argentinian sovereignty. Why? Because in 1982, the regime in the Argentinian government, was constituted of a military junta. A group of people. I'm going to write the word junta in the chat, right, for you to write if you want. A junta, is a group of military officers who organized. So that's a group of military officers. It's called a junta, and they had organized a political takeover of power in the 1970s. Can I say this differently? The Argentinian government was a dictatorial government that had the support of the United States because they were an extreme right-wing government and they were an anti-communist government. Remember, that's 1982. 1982 is the new Cold War, when Ronald Reagan decided to have America back. America is back, you remember this? Back in the Cold War. And so any anti-communist government was good enough to support by the USA. The problem is that this government was really losing. This Argentinian government, so was a military government, a dictatorial government. They had opponents arrested, put in jail and so on, tortured, assassinated. And it was losing popularity. And they considered that one way to regain popularity among the Argentinian population would be if they could win a war, and especially if they could claim that they had finally recovered the sovereignty over the Falkland. You see? So the Argentinian government thought the question over and said, if we attack the Falkland, it certainly won't be defended by the British because it's too far away. We'll be able to win a quick victory, and that quick victory will enable us to maintain our power over the Argentinian population, like regain popularity and so on. Okay? So on the 2nd of April, they invaded the Falkland, right? As you can see, it's very easy for Argentina. So they bombed the Falkland. They sent land troops, marine and land troops, and very easily, they captured the Falkland. Why very easily? Because all you had was a small garrison, a small group of British soldiers, British Marines, that protected the island. What I mean is that, of course, the British had very, very few soldiers protecting the island. I'm just going to show you one picture. I hope it will work as usual. Here we are. Yeah, it's working. Okay. This is, I hide you the caption because I will need it later. This is a picture which was taken when the Argentinian troops managed to take the islands, the Falklands. And what you can see on this picture is the marine detachments that were supposed to watch and to protect the islands that were defeated by the Argentinians. And the reason is that you had 100 of them. So 100 soldiers cannot protect an island against the invasion by thousands of men. Okay? So, in a few hours, the Falklands were taken by the Argentinians. In London, back in London, this invasion surprised everyone. I mean, there were very few signs, there were very few clues that the Argentinians were ready to take a military action to, grab the islands. Very soon, Margaret Thatcher gathered a cabinet and she said, okay, what are we going to do? And what she met was a lot of reluctancy. The cabinet, the ministers around her were not very favorable to an intervention. Remember, she was very unpopular. She got only 25% of the people's support. And it has to be said, many people around her, including in her cabinet, maybe they were not that unsatisfied that she may be put in trouble because they wanted her off. They wanted her to go. She was very unpopular. She could lose the next election. And she decided to say, okay, I'm in it. We are going to send British military to the Falkland. We are going to liberate the Falkland. The decision was taken so fast that only 4 days later, the British Army, was starting to move to the Falkland, as you can see on this map. So, okay, invasion of the island, 2nd of April 1982, after a few days of tensions. On the 6th of April, some troops left Portsmouth to go to the Falkland. But as you can see, it takes some time. You have to cross, look at the distance, you have to cross 12,000 kilometers. Okay? From the UK to the Falkland, it's 12,000 kilometers. And listen to me, that's important. If you look at the map that you have, you can see that just south of the Ecuador, the British Navy made a stop. And this stop is St. Helens base, which is a base that the US was lending to the UK. So it means that when Margaret Thatcher started the operation, she knew she had the support of Ronald Reagan, which is very important because Reagan was supporting the Argentinian government too. So he made a choice. Rather the UK than the Argentinians. Okay? The first confrontations took place in the sea. It was a navy battle, a sea and air battle first. The aim was to break the blockade that the Argentinians had made around the island, and then in the mid of May, on the 14th of May, the British troops landed, on one of the two Falkland Islands, the Pebble Island, and they started to reconquer the archipelago. These fights on the island itself, on the archipelago itself, lasted for 1 month. So invasion took place in early April In mid-June, it was over, and it was a massive British victory. Okay? Massive British victory. As you can see at the bottom, if you look at the top right-hand side of the map, it was not a massive conflict, right? You had 10,000 Argentinian soldiers, you had 7,000 British soldiers, and the amount of casualties overall was less than 1,000. Okay, less than 1,000 deaths. I'm not saying it's not serious, but I mean, if you compare with any other major war, you can see it's a small conflict. Okay? So it means that eventually the Falkland remained British. This is it. From a distance, let's make things clear. From a distance, it's really a minor conflict. Okay? This is the type of conflict that happens on a regular basis in the world for a few square meters of land. Very few casualties. Once again, I do not disrespect them, but I mean, less than 1,000 deaths for a war, less than 1,000 casualties for a war. Wow, that's not much. So how come that this war has remained in the United Kingdom as a major moment? And in Argentina too, I will show you that even in the Argentinian memories, it's still very vivid. Okay? Right. No questions so far? Oh, that's a very good question, Matthew. Yes. The USA was supposed to be opposed to colonialism. That's true. But firstly, the Falklands are mostly inhabited by British people. The people who live on the Falkland Islands, they have the British nationality. They are British citizens or subjects, which means that it's not really a colony. It's more an overseas region. You see? It was not seen as a colony in itself. It was not a local population, a native population under the domination of Europeans. So it's not seen as a colony. Secondly, the real choice for Ronald Reagan was, should we defend a dictatorial regime in Argentina, which is helping us against the communists? Or should we support Margaret Thatcher? And of course, for the USA, that meant deciding whose ally was the most important, whose ally was the most critical, whose ally was the most trustworthy. And as I've already told you, Reagan and Thatcher had strong relationships. They were both in the neoliberal conception of economics. They were both anti-communist and so on. Yeah, it's more like this. It's more an overseas region, absolutely. So this is why Reagan eventually decided to support the British. Okay. We see the role played by France too. There is an interesting anecdote about France in this war. Good. Immediately, in the United Kingdom, there was a massive mobilization in favor of the war, which means that clearly many medias, and especially one type of media called the tabloids, decided to support the war. And that's going to be my second part, or actually the second type of explanation I'm going to give you. So about the war itself, it's clear, okay? A territory which was disputed between Argentina and the UK. The Argentinian junta decided suddenly to invade it, and Margaret Thatcher decided that no, the Falklands should remain British because this is our land, sending troops there, and the troops taking only 2 months to reconquer the island. So, why has it remained as an important moment? Because immediately the war was an opportunity for the British press to cover the war, and to cover the war under two different forms. The first form is what you call the tabloids. Sorry, I need to insert my document. Here we are. Just coming. Here we are. Okay, this is the most famous one, the Sun. If you look at the date, right, that's the day after the Argentinian junta had decided to invade the Falkland, and the Sun titled its war Battle for the Island. So, 40 warships ready. The parachutists, the paras are called up, so the paras are the elite troops. Prince Andy to go, yes, because Andrew, who was, you may know him, it's Prince Charles' brother, is the Duke of York, and at that time he was serving in the army. And so, look at this, full story, pages 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So, it's, of course, a very sensationalist approach. It means that what is a tabloid? A tabloid is a format of newspaper which is a popular press. What are the specificities of this press? Firstly, it's cheap. Okay, if you look at this, it was costing only 14 pence at that time, so it's very cheap. And the quality of the paper actually is poor too, and the paper and the ink is a poor quality. Secondly, it's generally based on sensationalist titles, right? You will see the titles are always very short, very catchy, right? More slogans than anything else. Also, it tends to be jingoistic. You can find this word jingoistic. I'm going to write this in the chat, but it's based on jingoism. And what is jingoism? Jingoism is national pride. It's exactly the type of national pride you have when your football team is playing. And you know what it means? It means that you have, how can I say this? It's a form of nationalism. It's a form of nationalism. Like, you encourage your team whatever happens, and you know it's full of bad faith, and it's full of derogatory words for the enemy and so on, and the referee sometimes. Okay, you see, I'm sure you know what I mean. Try to imagine the type of things that people can say when they watch a game of their favorite team and their favorite team is being defeated, and you start insulting the enemy and so on. Jingoism, in French, it's called chauvinisme. Okay, just in case you want a translation. So jingoism is national pride, but national pride with a mean-spirited approach, generally, and full of bad faith. At that time, the Sun sold 3 million issues a day. 3 million issues. And today you may know the Sun because the Sun has been one of the most Europhobic newspapers in the Brexit referendum. It's generally read by working class people, but conservative working class people. So it's a conservative newspaper. It's generally more right wing. So populist, demagogist, jingoistic newspaper. You had other tabloids at that time. The Sun was not the only one. You have something like the Daily Mirror, right? And that's the Daily Mirror from the end of the war, when the British landed on the Falkland to reconquer them. Sorry, I just would like to enlarge this, if I may. Here we are. That's it. So you see, once again, short titles. Falklands are taken. Victory. So victory means victory for us, the British. You see, they don't write victory for the UK, but just victory, because if you read the Daily Mirror, you're for the British anyway. Argentine troops flee task force. Generals meet for ceasefire. So short titles, very catchy, very easy